The wood was green, still damp from the morning frost. Catherine Deshets-Montvoisanne-Lauvoisanne felt the rough hemp bite into her wrists as the executioner bound her to the stake. February 1680 placed a grave. The square teemed with bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, their breath rising in pale clouds against the iron sky. Somewhere a church bell tolled, deep and mournful, marking the hour of her death. The air smelled of pitch and fear. She stood 49 years old, though the months in the dungeons of Vincennes had carved decades into her face. Once, she had been beautiful, full-figured, with eyes that could entrance a duke or terrify a maid. Now her hair hung in greasy tangles, her dress the coarse sackcloth of the condemned. But her eyes, those dark wells that had seen too much, held fire still. The crowd murmured like a living thing. She caught fragments: sorceress, poisoner, devil's whore, a woman spat, a man crossed himself. Children perched on their fathers' shoulders to witness the spectacle, their faces bright with the terrible fascination of the young. How had it come to this? She closed her eyes against the winter light. Behind her lids, she saw not the stake, not the mob, but candlelit chambers where whispered secrets changed the fate of kingdoms. She saw silk gowns and desperate faces. She saw gold coins piled high. She saw power, real power, the kind that makes lords and ladies bow their heads and beg. The executioner approached with his torch, flame dancing orange against the grey morning. She had been powerful once. She had been sought by the highest in France. And they, those perfumed nobility, who had come to her door with their poisoned requests they would walk free while she burned. The injustice of it made her laugh, a sound harsh as a crow's cry. The torch touched the kindling, smoke began to rise. This was not how her story began. 20 years earlier, Catherine Deschets had been no one. The daughter of a provincial family fallen on misfortune, married at 19 to Antoine Montvoisin, a jeweller of modest skill and immodest debts. Their lodgings in the Rue Beauregard occupied the shadow space between respectability and ruin, rooms that smelled of tallow and disappointment. 3 children came quickly, their cries echoing through walls thin as paper, while Antoine's business crumbled like stale bread. She remembered the night she first realized her husband would never save them. He sat hunched over his workbench, face haggard in the candlelight, attempting to repair a merchant's broken clasp. His hands shook, the clasp fell, gold links scattering across the floor like scattered dreams. He did not move to retrieve them, just sat there, defeated, while their youngest wailed for milk they could not afford. Catherine had picked up the links one by one, fingers steady where his trembled. Something cold and hard had crystallized in her chest that night, hard as a diamond, sharp as a blade. If fortune would not come to her door, she would seize it by the throat. The city of Paris in 1660 was a place of superstition and fear, where the line between medicine and magic blurred in the smoky corners of apothecary shops. Women came to her first seeking simple things: herbs for headaches, poultices for wounds. She had learned such crafts from her mother, knowledge passed down in whispers, recipes written in no book. But they came back asking for more. A merchant's wife, face half hidden by her hood. Can you tell my future? Can you see if my husband's ship will return? A young maid, eyes red from weeping. Is there something to make him love me? Anything at all? An older woman, voice steady as stone. My husband beats me. Do you have something to make him sleep? Something ... permanent. Catherine discovered she possessed a gift, not true sight into the future, but something perhaps more valuable, the ability to read faces, to hear what lay beneath words, to tell people what they desperately needed to hear. When she read palms, they saw truth in the lines she traced. When she cast fortunes with cards, they found meaning in every turn. And when they asked for darker things, she learned where to find them. The network grew like roots in darkness. Father Etienne Guibourg, a defrocked priest with dead eyes and trembling hands, who would perform any ritual for coin. Marie Basse, a fortune teller and poisoner who knew which powders killed slowly and which struck like lightning. Adam Lesage, who called himself a magician and sold mysteries wrapped in Latin incantations. Catherine's home transformed. The lower floor remained respectable. Clients entered through the front door to have their fortunes told. But beneath, accessed through a hidden door behind the kitchen, lay chambers that never saw the sun. The cellar smelled of sulphur and dried herbs, of candle wax and something older, earthier corruption and transformation mixed. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with bottles of amber and green glass. Inside, powders of arsenic and antimony, extracts of nightshade and hemlock, love philters made from dove's blood and Spanish fly, jars labelled in a code only she could read. In the centre of the largest chamber stood an altar. Not a Christian altar, though it bore a crude cross, black cloth draped across stone. Here Father Giborg performed his masses. Black masses, whispered the city, though that name came later. Women came to these rituals seeking power over lovers, revenge on enemies, the death of inconvenient husbands. They paid in gold, they paid in secrets, they paid in pieces of their souls. Catherine presided over it all, no longer the jeweller's desperate wife, but Lauvoisanne, a name that meant neighbour, but carried weight like a title. She dressed in fine fabrics now, imported silks in deep crimson and midnight blue. Rings adorned her fingers, gold chains her neck. Her house on the Rue Beauregard became known throughout Paris among those who dwelt in shadow. A house where impossible things became possible, where fate itself could be purchased like bread. The nobility came veiled and cloaked, slipping through her door at midnight. She learned their faces, their secrets, their sins. A countess seeking to eliminate a rival for her lover's affections. A duke's mistress desperate to maintain her hold on his heart and his purse. A merchant prince wanting his brother's inheritance. A young wife married to a cruel old man, her eyes haunted, asking in whispers if there was a poison that could not be detected. Catherine provided, always, she provided. She told herself she was merely facilitating fate's work. These nobles, these rich parasites who ground the poor beneath their heels, they deserved whatever befell them. If they destroyed each other with her help, was that not simply justice? The money poured in, gold louis, silver écus, jewelry torn from desperate fingers. She purchased property, she kept carriages. Her children dressed in velvet. At night, alone in her chambers, she sometimes wondered at the woman she had become. The frightened mother counting coppers had transformed into someone else entirely, someone who held life and death in her hands, who bent the world to her will through cunning and darkness. Power, she discovered, was intoxicating, and Paris was thirsty for what she sold. The poison panic began slowly, like fever creeping through a body. In 1670, whispers started at the French court. The Marquise de Brinvilliers had murdered her father and brothers with arsenic to claim their inheritance. When her co-conspirator was tortured to death, he confessed every detail. The Marquise fled France, but the case opened like a wound in the aristocracy's flesh, revealing the rock beneath. If one noble family could be riddled with poisoners, how many more? Paranoia spread through Versailles like plague. Nobles eyed each other across banquet tables, wondering if poison lurked in the wine. King Louis XIV himself grew wary, employing tasters for every meal. The court became a nest of suspicion, everyone both predator and potential prey. Catherine felt the tremor in the city's pulse. Her clients came more frequently, more desperately. The demand for poisons, the inheritance powder, the succession powder multiplied, but so did the requests for protection. Is there a way to detect poison, to guard against it? She sold both sword and shield, growing rich on fear itself. The black masses grew more elaborate. In her cellar, by candlelight that made shadows dance like demons, Father Giborg performed rituals that blurred the line between theatre and genuine horror. A naked woman, sometimes a prostitute, sometimes a desperate client, would lie upon the altar, a chalice balanced on her bare stomach. Giborg chanted bastardized Latin over wine mixed with blood, invoking names that should not be spoken. Catherine had ceased to believe or disbelieve. She had moved beyond such simple categories. What mattered was that her clients believed, that they left convinced their dark prayers would be answered, and often enough, they were. One night in 1676, a figure arrived shrouded so completely that even Catherine could not discern her face. But the rings on her fingers told their own story, sapphires the size of walnuts, emeralds that caught the candle light like green fire. Nobility, high nobility. The woman's voice was silk over steel. I need someone removed, permanently untraceable. Such things carry great cost, Catherine replied. I can pay any price. Gold changed hands. heavy purses that clinked with promise. Catherine provided what was requested, a powder, tasteless and odorless, that would mimic the symptoms of apoplexy if administered over time. The woman departed as mysteriously as she had come. 3 weeks later, news swept Paris. A prominent courtier had died suddenly, struck down by what physicians declared a seizure of the brain. Catherine knew better, and she knew her client walked the halls of Versailles with clean hands and a satisfied smile. Such was her power. She could not command armies or pass laws, but she could reach into the highest chambers of France and touch lives in them, if necessary. A woman born to nothing, now pulling strings that made aristocrats dance. Her house became a crossroads of conspiracy. Clients arrived at all hours. Some sought love potions made from mandragora root and nightingale hearts, others wanted death in a bottle. Some simply wanted their fortunes told, to know if their schemes would succeed. She provided for all of them. The network expanded. She employed a small army, herbalists who gathered belladonna and foxglove from forest depths, alchemists who distilled essences and compounds, midwives who performed abortions and disposed of unwanted infants, priests who had strayed so far from grace that one more step into darkness cost them nothing. Money flowed like a river in flood. But rivers, Catherine knew, could drown you if you weren't careful. By 1678, the poison panic had reached a crescendo. Bodies piled up among the nobility, some from genuine natural causes, others from causes that seemed natural but were not. The king's mistress, Madame de Montespan, was rumoured to be involved with fortune-tellers and sorcerers, desperate to maintain her fading influence over Louis. Rumours reached even Catherine's ears that her own name had been whispered in Versailles. The realization sent ice through her veins. She had grown too successful, too visible. She had become a threat. In January 1679, King Louis XIV established La Chambre Ardente, the Burning Court, a special tribunal to investigate the poisonings that had terrorized his court. The name itself evoked the flames of hell, a promise of purgation by fire. Chief of Police Gabriel Nicolas de Lorraine was appointed to lead the investigation. He was a man of cold intelligence and relentless thoroughness, someone who understood that to root out conspiracy, you must follow its threads to wherever and whomever they led. Catherine felt the noose tightening. Her associates began to disappear. Marie Basse was arrested in January 1679, captured in a tavern while drunkenly boasting of her ability to supply poisons. Under torture, the brodequins that crushed the bones of the legs, the water torture that drowned victims slowly from the inside, she named names. Deshets-Montvoisanne-Lauvoisanne, the centre of the web. They came for her in March 1679, just before dawn. Catherine woke to the crash of her door splintering, the thunder of boots on her stairs. She had time only to rise from her bed before soldiers filled her chamber, their torches casting savage shadows across the walls. Lorraine himself stood in her doorway, face grave as a judge. "Catherine Deshets-Montvoisanne," he said, voice formal, "you are under arrest on charges of poisoning, sorcery, and conspiracy against the crown." She had prepared for this moment, had imagined it in nightmares. Yet when it arrived, she felt strangely calm, as if watching events happen to someone else. By whose authority? Her voice did not shake. By authority of the king himself and the Chambre Ardente. She saw her daughter Marie Marguerite watching from the doorway, face white with terror. Poor child, what would become of her? They took Catherine to Vincennes, a fortress that squatted on Paris's eastern edge like a stone toad. Her cell was narrow, cold, lit by a single barred window that admitted more wind than light. Stone walls wept with moisture. The floor was bare earth that smelled of mold and old urine. Here she waited while Lorraine gathered his evidence. Piece by damning piece, the interrogations began within days. They brought her to a chamber where instruments of torture gleamed in firelight: the rack, the wheel, the pincers. Lorraine sat behind a table, quill and ink at hand, recording everything. "Tell us about your clients," he commanded. "I have committed no crime," she replied. "We have testimony that you sold poisons, that you performed devil worship, that you murdered infants in your rituals." The last accusation struck like a physical blow. "Lies. Marie Basse has confessed. So has your priest, Giborg. They have named you. They would say anything to stop the pain you inflict. Lorraine leaned forward. Name your clients. Tell us which nobles came to you, what they purchased. This is your only path to mercy. Catherine understood the trap. They did not want her, not really. She was merely a key to unlock greater doors. They wanted the nobles, the courtiers, perhaps even the king's own mistress. But if she gave them those names, she would be disposable. They would squeeze her dry of information, then discard her like a used rag. If she remained silent, she held power, a scorpion backed into a corner, whose sting could reach even the untouchable. I will say nothing. The torture began that night. She learned that pain has dimensions beyond imagining, that the body can become an instrument of its own betrayal. They applied the brodequin's wooden boards tightened around her legs with mallets, driving wedges between the boards until bones cracked like kindling. She screamed until her voice broke. But she did not name names. They tried the water torture next, forcing her to swallow jar after jar of water until her stomach distended grotesquely, until she felt she would burst from within. She vomited and choked and wept, but she did not name names. They tried the water torture next, forcing her to swallow jar after jar of water until her stomach distended grotesquely, until she felt she would burst from within. She vomited and choked and wept, but she did not name names. Lorraine watched it all with cold eyes, making his notes. You are protecting people who would never protect you, he said during one session, voice almost kind. They have abandoned you. Give us their names and we will show mercy. Catherine laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Mercy. You mean a clean execution instead of being torn apart. Thank you for such generosity. Between torture sessions, in her cell, she had time to think. The pain had clarified certain truths. She had believed herself powerful, but she had been merely useful. She had served the wealthy, and they had paid her well, but she had never truly been one of them. To them she was a tool, a convenience, as disposable as a used handkerchief. The bitter irony, she had helped them poison and destroy each other, and now they would destroy her without a second thought. Her daughter Marie Marguerite was arrested as well, pressured to testify against her own mother. Catherine heard rumors that the girl had spoken of black masses, of rituals in the cellar, of clients who came cloaked at midnight. Poor child, she had only tried to protect herself. As weeks became months, Catherine realized that Lorraine faced an impossible situation. His investigation had uncovered names that reached to high to the king's favorites, to intimate circles around Louis himself. If he revealed everything, it would shake the foundations of the court. She was not the only danger, she was simply the most obvious. The investigation continued through 1679 into 1680, but Catherine noticed a change. Certain questions ceased being asked, certain names were no longer mentioned. The interrogations focused on her lower-class associates, on the mechanics of poison-making, on theatrical details of black masses. They were building a narrative: Lauvoisanne, the sorceress, the poisoner, the devil worshipper. A monster so vile that her execution would satisfy public outrage while conveniently obscuring the nobility's involvement. She would be the scapegoat, the fire that burned away uncomfortable truths. In January 1680, they informed her that her trial would begin. The Chambre Ardente met in the Arsenal, a grim fortress where justice wore an iron face. Catherine was brought in chains to face her judges, 13 men in black robes, seated in a semicircle like ravens on a branch. Chief among them sat Lorraine, and beside him Francois de Besans, rapporteur of the court. Behind them, the chamber's walls disappeared into shadow, but she could feel the weight of spectators watching from the darkness. The trial had already begun in the streets. Pamphlets circulated describing her crimes in lurid detail: child sacrifice, pacts with demons, poisons that killed hundreds. The public devoured every word, hungry for monsters. Better to believe in a sorceress, Catherine thought, than to admit their own nobles were poisoning each other for inheritance and spite. The charges were read: multiple counts of murder by poisoning, sorcery, sacrilege, and conspiracy. Her network of poisoners and sorcerers was detailed, her cellar chambers described with theatrical horror. How do you plead? De Besans asked. I am guilty of reading fortunes, Catherine said clearly. Nothing more, the rest is fabrication. They brought forth witnesses. Marie Bass, broken by torture, testified about their trade in poisons. Father Giborg, pale as death, described the black masses in mechanical detail. Minor associates promised leniency, painted Catherine as a monster who commanded them all. Her own daughter testified, tears streaming down her face, describing what she had seen in her mother's house. Catherine felt each word like a blade between her ribs. They presented evidence. Bottles of powder found in her home, tested on animals that died in convulsions. Letters from nobles that had been intercepted, though conveniently the nobles' names were redacted from public record. Testimony from servants claiming their masters had been poisoned after consulting Lauvoisanne. Through it all, Catherine maintained her composure. She admitted to fortune-telling a minor crime. She denied murder, denied the black masses, denied any involvement in poisoning. But the tribunal's verdict was predetermined. This was not a search for truth, but a performance, a ritual of purification. France needed a witch to burn, and she had been cast in the role. The trial lasted mere days. On February 17, 1680, the verdict was read. Catherine Deshets, known as Lauvoisanne, you are found guilty of sorcery, poisoning, and profanation of the sacraments. The sentence of this court is death. You will be burned alive at the place de grave, and your ashes scattered to prevent any relics remaining. Burned alive, not merely executed, but purified by fire, her very existence erased. Catherine felt the world tilt. She had known this was coming, yet hearing the words spoken made it real. That night in her cell, she wrote letters to her daughter, begging forgiveness. To her surviving son, warning him to flee France. To no one in particular, documenting what had truly happened, though she knew the words would never be read. She thought of all the people she had helped. The women desperate to escape brutal husbands. The servants terrified of abusive masters. Yes, she had sold poison to nobles playing their deadly games, but she had also given power to the powerless, if only for a moment. Was she a monster? Perhaps, but she had been made into one by a world that gave women no other path to power. She would not apologize, not to them. February 22, 1680, dawn came grey and cold. They roused Catherine before first light, giving her water, but no food. The condemned traditionally fasted before execution. A priest arrived to hear her confession, but she waved him away. I have nothing to confess that would interest God, she said. They dressed her in the grey shift of the condemned, cut her hair short so flames would reach her skin more quickly. Her hands were bound with rope that bit into her wrists. They forced her to drink wine mixed with something bitter mercy. They called it a poison to dull the pain of burning. She laughed at the irony, poisoned by her executioners. The cart rattled through Paris's streets toward the Place de Grève. Citizens lined the route, shouting curses and prayers. Some threw refuse, others simply stared, faces hungry for spectacle. Catherine looked at them all. These were the people she had served, in her way. The desperate and the damned, they threw stones now, but how many had come to her door begging for miracles? The Place de Grève opened before her like a mouth. The stake stood in the centre of the square, surrounded by bundles of wood and straw. The crowd packed the space, thousands of bodies pressed together. Vendors sold wine and pastries, children climbed onto their fathers' shoulders. Nobles watched from windows, safely distant from the mob. Soldiers formed a corridor through the crowd, pushing back those who pressed too close. Catherine was pulled from the cart, half dragged across the cobblestones. Her legs had weakened the torture, the months of imprisonment, the poison they had given her. The stake was rough wood, splinters catching at her shift. They bound her to it with chains, iron links that dug into her ribs. The executioner worked efficiently, checking the bonds, ensuring the wood was properly stacked. A priest approached one final time, holding a crucifix before her face. Repent, daughter, save your immortal soul. Catherine looked at the cross, at the dying man nailed to wood. She understood him better now than she ever had. Go away, she whispered, the crowd's roar built like a storm. She heard fragments of shouts, witch poisoner, burn her. But also, from somewhere in the mass of bodies, God have mercy. The executioner raised his torch, flame danced orange and gold against the grey morning. He looked at Lorraine, who stood on a platform nearby, for final confirmation. Lorraine nodded. The torch touched the kindling. Fire caught slowly at first, smoke rising in thin tendrils. Catherine felt heat against her legs, uncomfortable but not yet painful. The wood was green. Damp, it would burn slowly, extending her agony. She had heard that burning was the worst of all deaths, that the smoke often suffocated you before flames reached the heart. She prayed for that mercy now. The flames grew, yellow and red, climbing the wood like hungry serpents, heat built in waves. The crowd's roar became distant, replaced by the fire's crackling voice. Smoke stung her eyes. She coughed, each breath bringing more smoke into her lungs. The hem of her shift caught fire, burning up toward her skin. Pain arrived not as a single moment, but as a rising tide. Her legs burned, the skin of her feet blistered and split. She tried to lift herself on her chains, trying to escape the flames, but there was nowhere to go. She screamed, not words, just sound, the body's protest against its own destruction. Through smoke and tears, she saw the crowd watching. Some faces showed satisfaction, others horror. Some had turned away, unable to watch. None of them would save her. The pain transcended anything she had imagined. Every nerve screamed. The smell of her own burning flesh filled her nostrils. She tried to pray but could form no words. In her final moments, as consciousness flickered, she thought of the women who had come to her seeking power. Had she helped them? Had it meant anything? The flames reached her chest, her throat. Smoke filled her lungs completely. Darkness rushed in like a mercy. 300 years later, her name remains a whisper in histories, a shadow in the archives. The woman who was powerful enough to terrify kings, who held life and death in her hands, who rose from nothing to command the fear and desire of the highest in France. She burned, but she was never extinguished. The ashes of Lauvoisanne, scattered by royal decree, fell upon a city that would never quite forget the woman who showed how much darkness lurked beneath its glittering surface. And in that way, perhaps, Catherine Deshets-Montvoisanne won after all.